Okay, let's start. Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning in Jakarta. Today we will have our next webinar series on COVID-19, and this is today we are going to talk about jobs and the pandemic in Indonesia. We already have three prominent speakers in the panel. So we have Chris Manning, Titik Anas, and Joanna Octavia to talk about this issue. And Chris Manning, honorary associate professor of ANU, will lead and will chair the event. So I will let Chris to introduce the speakers and probably to give some overview of the issue and then chair the whole session. Silakan Chris.
Thank you very much, Pak Aco. Selamat siang in Jakarta, in Canberra, and selamat pagi in Jakarta and elsewhere in Indonesia. It's welcome to this Indonesia Project seminar series on jobs in the pandemic. We have two speakers today. So the speakers, I'm not a speaker, I'm just the chairman. The two speakers are Titik Anas, Dr. Titik Anas and Joanna Octavia. And they are going to address the webinar. Before I introduce them, let me make a couple of comments about the situation of jobs in Indonesia as I see it right now. First of all, how best might we characterize the situation? Unfortunately, there are no silver bullets, such as unemployment or underemployment, to guide us in the middle of 2020. Indonesia only undertakes a labour force survey in February, and that was really before COVID had hit Indonesia. And the second survey in the year is in August, and those results don't come out until November. So at this stage, we are very much in the dark when it comes to the national picture. But it is very clear that many jobs have been lost, at least for the present. Despite some new opportunities, for example, personal protective equipment, we can be fairly certain that the net number of jobs lost is negative, at least for the current quarter. And the negative impact is almost certainly much larger if we take into account the fall in hours worked, the number of people that have been dirumahkan, that have been stood down, and associated loss of incomes. For example, I think Dr. Titik will present some data which suggests that manufacturing jobs have been particularly hard hit. What do we know about the situation? From media reports, we've got a fairly good idea that many large companies have laid off workers. HBSC, thousands of workers. Hilton, over 2,000. Gruda has offered 400 workers early retirement and stood down 800. And so the list goes on. But we need to keep in mind that most people who have lost work and incomes are almost certainly from micro and small enterprises. Unique to this crisis, the effect of cutbacks on labour demand has been exacerbated by the directive that people work and study from home and by the regulation of social distancing, the PSBB. For example, in the case of Yogyakarta, where I reside, a myriad of informal sector workers of a range of services, food, transport and delivery, consumables, have at least temporarily put their businesses on hold. Not only has the flow of tourists dried up, but tens of thousands of students have left Yogyakarta to study at home and will continue to do, many of them will continue to do so till the end of 2020. I think Joanna will provide some more detailed information about the loss of informal sector jobs that have been associated with similar regulation of places of work and study. I hope that the discussion will reveal information on trends in the job situation by region. The restrictions on mobility initially impacted, especially in Jakarta and the cities in Java, affecting demand for urban services and on work and in crowded places such as traditional markets. Most of you will have seen pictures of the crowded pasar that seem to have little hope of following the social distancing or PSBB rules. Unlike 2 decades ago, at the time of the Asian financial crisis, I think it's reasonable to say that people are less able to substitute formal with informal jobs this time around. But at the same time, as the concentration of effects in the large cities, the impacts of COVID have now spread by industry and region. And we can see the large number of cases in outer island provinces such as South Sumatra, South Sulawesi, even Papua. And so we'd expect then the employment effects, the effects on jobs to have spread also well beyond the major cities on Java. Finally, it's worth remembering that the job situation is a moving target from week to week and from month to month as the virus unfolds across Indonesia. Regulations and economic conditions are changing both in Jakarta and in the regions. Jakarta, for example, has had 2 extensions of social distancing regulations in July alone. So this is very much an unfolding story. So those are my few opening comments. I hope they will help us think about the topic in general. Now to our 2 speakers. Dr Titik Anas will go first, and she is a special advisor to the Ministry of Finance and a senior lecturer and researcher at the Department of Economics, Padjadjaran University. Dr Anas earned her bachelor degree from the University of Indonesia and her master's and PhD degrees from the Australian National University, in Canberra. Besides advising the government, she is also a very active researcher. And her interests cover areas such as international trade, macroeconomics, industrial organisation, investment policy, and small-scale business development. And she continues to publish widely in those fields. Our second speaker is Joanna Octavia, and she's a PhD candidate at the University of Warwick. The University of Warwick Institute of Employment Research. She is currently spending time at CSIS in Jakarta. She has a PhD, she has a Master of Science from the London School of Economics and a Bachelor of Arts from the University of British Columbia, Vancouver. The main areas of interest are the informal sector, workers' voice, industrial relations, and the platform economy. And her areas of study have mostly been in the area of political economy. She spent the last 6 years in Jakarta, at CSIS as a visiting fellow. She's worked at UBA, Indonesia. She has extensive practical experience with supporting the informal sector and the Centre for Public Policy Transformation in Jakarta. While in Jakarta, she's been very active writing and speaking about the informal sector. Topics like mobilisation of online motorcycle taxi drivers, organising and mobilising informal workers in the digital age, and on social networks and collective action, the gig economy in Indonesia, and so on. So she's very well quick to talk about the informal sector and the pandemic. So those are my opening comments and my introduction to the two speakers. So it's over to Titik to give the first address.
Thank you, Pak Chris. How is my voice? Is it clearly? Yeah. Good morning to friends in Indonesia. Good afternoon for participants in Canberra and Australia. And good evening to Puspa and everyone else in the other side of the world. Thank you very much for the Indonesia project, for this opportunity to share how Indonesia's government responding to the COVID-19, particularly for today's topic on workers. My talk will comprise of three parts. First is how COVID-19 affecting businesses and jobs in Indonesia. The second part is on how the government policy dealing with COVID-19, particularly on business and workers. The third part is I will touch a little bit on the monitoring and evaluation part of the policy implementation. And I will listen to Joanna later on, an expert here who cares about Indonesia, so that we can improve any policies that still considered probably not effective or not well targeted. So let me start with what Chris already mentioned. First slide, please. The next slide, please. Just like what Chris mentioned, we are still struggling with COVID-19 as the number of cases still continue to increase. Although, as you probably attended the CSIS webinar launch of the COVID-19 dashboard, suggesting that the active case is declining. Although in the last few days, we see some increase also in the active cases. With this, the increase is partly resulted from the opening up of the economy. I mean, it's taking in place after the opening up of the economy, and although also the more or increase in testing and tracing that carried out by the government and the health sectors. The increase in the number of the COVID-19 itself affecting the economy for sure. If we see or projected the economy to grow to 5.3 this year, when we did a forecast last year, we don't see it anymore. We have been revising the projection twice. It is going to be difficult to make an accurate projection, given that the situation is very dynamic, that the COVID-19 is unpredictable, the effect on the economy. But given our second projection, the economy might grow only 1% this year, or if the worst come worse, the economy might be contracted to 0.4%. Other international institutions also make projection on the economic growth of Indonesia, and the latest projection is also revised downward. Like the ADB forecasted -1%, IMF -0.3%, the World Bank projected the Indonesian economy is going to be stagnated, and the OECD from -2.8% to -3.9%. The slowdown of the economic growth is for sure going to be affected the social welfare as well. We projected or predicted that the unemployment is going to increase and the poverty rate is going to increase. For that, of course, the government has to undertake a policy to mitigate or to minimize the negative effect to the social welfare. Next slide, please. The early shock to the economy of the COVID-19 we have witnessed in the first quarter of 2020, where the economic growth was only 2.97%. From the demand side, we see the reduction of growth in all parts of the expenditure. On the supply side, also almost all sectors show the much lower growth. Particularly the slowing down significant in transportation, accommodation and food beverages, manufacturing and trade. Next slide, please. Some studies by research institutions and consultants also provided a projection that the economy, the sectors in the economy will hardly hit. For example, on the right-hand side of the table, we see that the earnings of the tourism industry will decline very sharply, and followed by the trade sectors and the manufacturing. The hit comes from not only the supply side but also the demand side. Next slide, please. How the effect of the slowdown of the economic activity resulted by COVID-19 containment to jobs. As Chris mentioned, we only have labor force survey twice a year and has not come out yet after the COVID-19 hit Indonesia. But some early survey like the World Bank high frequency household monitoring survey can make a suggestion that many Indonesians have already affected by COVID-19. This survey is going to conducted for times at least, 4 rounds at least. The first round is in May. So this is the result of the May survey, suggesting that 1/3 of who works in the manufacturing, construction, and transport stop working. And the share of people who stop working are at the same across the welfare distribution. And those in Java, especially in Jakarta and the urban areas, people with senior secondary education and lower are likely to stop working. Not much different between female and male breadwinners. So this early survey suggested that yes, we are having an issue of jobs in Indonesia. Next, please. Then, given that a policy response, ever since the beginning of this year, the government has responded to the COVID-19, given the dynamics of the evolution of the problems. As some of you probably already also monitor that the first was addressing the disruption of the supply chain in February and the reduction in tourism visits in Indonesia. But then as COVID-19 contagion spread across the nation, particularly the urban areas and the Jakarta greater area at the beginning, these response have been changed or revised or updated to meet the evolving situation. So currently, what the government has done is first upsizing the social assistance. We in Indonesia have already established the social assistance program. So based on that already existing system, the government upsized the size and the coverage. The second one is on fiscal incentive to address the formal workers who are still working, those with income of 200 million rupiah a year is tax-free and not paying taxes. And these taxes are usually paid by the employers monthly. So monthly, the workers are receiving the benefit. And the third is the Prakerja program. The government also have the Cash for Works, basically providing jobs to those who are not working and get paid for the work. And the last one is the help for the companies, including the micro, small, and medium enterprises. Next. As you probably know that the Indonesian government have the PKH, the Family Hope Programs, and the non-cash food assistance, the Kartu Sembako, and also Dana Desa. The government has been optimizing on these instruments, again addressing the most vulnerable income groups in Indonesia. On top of what the central government doing, the local government also provided or addressing the social welfare as the first instrument or foremost instrument. For example, the local, the West Java government where I live covers more than 10 million of the 14 million family in West Java through the additional support to the central government budget. So in total, they cover 60 to 70% of the population. Next. This slide is rather messy, but these are the 7 programs of social assistance that the government of Indonesia is having. The first, the left-hand side, the blue one is the PKH, the Family Hope Program. The upsize is on the value of the assistance. This covered the bottom 20% of Indonesians, the bottom income group of Indonesia. And then we have the non-cash transfer, we call it Kartu Sembako. This is non-cash, so every recipient has its account in the financial sectors. The amount is upsized from 150,000 to 200,000, and the beneficiary is also upsized from 15.4 million to 20 million. And the purple one is on the electricity bill discount. So basically the government paid the bill of the electricity customer of 450 volt the smallest consumers in the electricity consumption. It's around 24 million household. The government paid their bill for until the end of December. Yeah, so the program has been expanded. It's no longer April to September, but until the end of the year. And the government also subsidized the 900 VA customers, around 7.2 million household, and it's also expanded into December. And the government is also planning to add more of the recipients of the 900 VA in the next few months. And the additional program is the Jabodetabek, the Jakarta Greater Area Assistance, because Jakarta Greater Area is the first hit area of the COVID-19 and the hardest hit. So particular assistance is provided for the people in the Jakarta Greater Area. Similarly to urban areas in outside the Jakarta greater area also provided with cash, additional cash social assistance. This is cash basically. And the amount or the support will be provided until December. So with the other one is the village fund is converted into social assistance. This supposedly cover all the vulnerable group in the villages who is not covered by program Family Hope or Kartu Sembako or additional cash assistance that already provided by the government. So with this all scheme, we hope to cover the lowest 50% of the income group. And we also have another scheme which is called Prakerja, which I will talk more a bit later, to those who are not currently in a formal education, has no work, or they're from the MSME. This program is a adjusted program that should also have been implemented this year, but because of the COVID, the mechanism and the way of deliverables is adjusted a little bit. Maybe I should speed up a little bit. Next slide, please. And this is the distribution of the social assistance beneficiaries. The largest beneficiaries are the farmers. If we see the sectors and the income group, among the income group, the farmers are the largest recipient, followed by the services sectors, people who work in the services sectors, and the manufacturing. Next. And how the disbursement of the social assistance so far, among the budget allocated, like the 995 trillion, 203 trillion is allocated to social assistance. So far, it's already disbursed like 38% of the budget allocated. The existing program are usually more smooth in disbursement, while the new or the top up is less smooth than the already established program. Next. This is what I talk about the formal workers take-home pay. They got higher take-home pay because the government paid their taxes. The claims are so far around 1.1 trillion rupiah with beneficiary of 108. And the sectors who claim the largest is the trade sectors, the most affected sectors in the economy, followed by the manufacturing and construction. Next. And the third is the Prakerja program. The early design is to upgrade the skill of the workers with the beneficiary of 2 million. Because of the COVID-19, the number of beneficiary increased, the budget allocated is increased, and the design is not only for skill improvement, but also to maintain the purchasing power of workers who have been laid off, or being working at home, for example. And the benefit is also adjusted. While in the original program, the training can be online, offline, and hybrid, with the value of the training is from 3 to 7 million, with the incentive is only like 500 a month, 1 month. It's only one time, and incentive to conduct or to give feedback to the survey. Because of the COVID-19, the training has been adjusted. With the value of the training only 1 million, it's only online, and the benefit to the recipient is 600,000 a month for 4 months. And the first 3 batches of the Prakerja has been highly subscribed. 11.6 million applied at the Prakerja website with the simple selection process. Only verify, you only have to provide the electronic ID and phone number, and also the only those two actually. And the verification is by checking the ID, the phone number, and also face recognition, and whether the email is correct or not. And the beneficiary, of course, because of the over subscription, the beneficiary is only like 680. 58% of them are the layoff workers, 35% is job seekers, but also some inclusion error where 6% are employee actually, and 1% is from micro business. Among these recipients, some of them are the whitelist of the Ministry of Manpower and the employee Social Security members. Next. This is the distribution of the recipient where we can see that almost all, I think all the provinces have the participants of Prakerja program, where the highest participants comes from the most affected region of the COVID-19, which is Jakarta, West Java, and then East Java, Central Java, and Banten. Next. And from the incentive, it's already claimed for 641 billions. And the interesting thing is that it's not only through the conventional financial sectors like the bank, but mainly spent or disbursed through the e-wallet, yeah, like the OVO. For even the largest is through OVO, followed by GoPay and Link Aja. The use of the incentives by the recipients is to purchase fuel, to pay electricity, purchase mobile phone credit, spending on the mini market, or withdrawn. 30% of the participants has zero balance in their account. 60% has less than 50,000. The training package chosen by the participants, the highest is the marketing skills and IT, finance, foreign language, lifestyle, management, office, social behavior, food and beverages. Next. The Prakerja program has been in public attention, highly criticized, so that the government, the Prakerja committee particularly, have made their evaluation. So the program has been stopped temporarily. And because the review has to be made and the adjustment has to be made to the decree, because in Indonesia everything has to have a decree. If you have to change one element in the decree, you have to change the decree itself. So it will take time to restart a program. One important clause in the amendment of the decree is that the incentive money must be returned if the participant doesn't fit the criteria. And the implementation of the offline training is planned to start in August. And given the budget allocated of 20 trillion, the quota for the training should be increased to 500,000 a batch to allow the budget allocated be absorbed. Next. Cash forward, basically providing jobs to people through the Ministry of Public Works, Agriculture, Forestry, Fishery, and also local governments. Many local governments in Indonesia provide these cash forwards. And even Dana Desa will also be converted to cash forwards. Next. Apart from those instruments, the government also provide private sectors, particularly MSMEs, with support. The first one is the subsidized credit interest payment for MSMEs. The program is basically for all the credits in the financial institution, the interest will be paid by the government. The government require those credit below 500 million rupiah to be, doesn't have to be restructured to get the facility, but the credit over 500 million needs to be restructured, and the collectability quality is met. And the government also provide low-cost working capitals for MSMEs. This is through the placement of government funding to the financial sectors, particularly the banking sectors. And then the government also provide the insurance, the credit guarantee to the loans that provided by the financial sectors, particularly the banking sectors, so that the take-up is more, because the COVID-19 posed higher risk to the banking sectors to lend capitals to anyone. And then loan restructured for MSME, based on the OJK data, we already have 5 million MSMEs. The loans has been restructured, value of the loans of more than 300 trillion. And also, if you see from the news, from the news that you also hear that the president wants to give cash transfer to productive use, and also the credit for the household businesses, and the last one is the tax refunds for the MSMEs. This is only for those registered in the tax office, basically. Next. So I think the government is taking the stand where a responsive and effective policy requires regular monitoring. We at the Ministry of Finance also have a MONEF team to monitor and evaluate the implementation of the COVID-19, the fund allocated to COVID-19 handling and the economic recovery in general. Basically, the objective is to assess whether the programs meet the objective and the implementation is as planned. Part of the task is the bottlenecking and making adjustment to policy for better targeting and impactful. And you'll also probably hear that the president also established a team of this economic recovery program. So I think I end my introduction to our discussion there, and thank you very much once again for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Titik. Can you hear me? Yeah. Thank you very much. That's a very comprehensive introduction to what the government is doing. Wide array of programs. The ability to mount the programs is certainly impressive compared with, say, 1998, because Indonesia's really gone into social assistance in quite a big way. So that's very good. I guess the question we'd have for this topic, jobs, is how much is getting to people who've lost their jobs. And maybe Joanna will ask later on how much is getting down to the informal sector. So can I ask Joanna now to address the topic, that is stories from the informal sector. Silakan, Mbak.
Hi, hi everyone. Thank you, Pat Chris, for welcoming me. And also thank you so much for the invitation from the ANU Indonesia project to attend the panel today. And also thank you to Bu Titik for the very comprehensive explanation about the government policy responses earlier. Today I'll be sharing a bit about the jobs and pandemic, the case of Indonesia, but on stories and perspectives from the informal sector. The presentation will be divided into three parts. The first part, I'll be discussing a bit about the overview of the COVID-19 in Indonesia, what the major aspects of the response are that affects the state of informality in the country. Also talk a bit about the state of informality in Indonesia, especially setting the scene of what the informal sector was like when COVID-19 broke out in the country. I'll also talk a bit about the impact on informal sector workers, and as well as the impact on certain types of occupations across geographies in the country. Part two will talk a bit about the response, not only by government, but also other stakeholders, such as civil society, NGO, private sector, among the workers themselves, and the implications that these responses may have raised with regards to impacts on the informal sector. And the last part, we'll discuss a bit about future direction and also some short-term as well as long-term policy recommendations. So for an overview of COVID-19 outbreak in Indonesia, I think Bu Titik had explained a bit earlier as well. The first case broke out in early March this year, followed soon thereafter with calls to close offices, schools, public places. Travel ban was set in place, and also large-scale social restrictions were put in place starting in Jakarta, but soon spreading into other parts of the country, including Surabaya, Bodetabek regions, and etc. I think of notable of note during this period, the past 5 months, is also the homecoming ban during the Ramadan month, which basically prohibits a number of workers from going home to their hometowns. In early June, we saw the gradual reopening of offices, business activities with limited capacities, but unfortunately, the COVID crisis is still ongoing. I think as of this week, we are at 100,000 confirmed cases, and the slope is still going upwards. The COVID-19 can be characterized by three major things, and these are things that affect the livelihoods of the informal sector. The first is restrictions on mobility. The second is closure of space and activities. And the third is consumer behavioral change. And we'll be seeing these patterns, these themes and patterns throughout the presentation as we discuss the impact of the pandemic on the informal sector workers. Just an overview of informality. The majority of Indonesians do generate their income, earn their livelihoods in the informal sector. More than 55% of the workforce work in the informal sector. They are spread across sectors and occupations in both the rural as well as urban areas. You have informal sector workers in agriculture, fisheries, domestic work, construction, transport work, just to name a few. The majority of informal workers can be divided into two categories. The first is wage employment, in which they generate income, they receive salary from a dedicated employer, or self-employment, in which they are own account workers and they get their income on a per task basis. Informal workers also access work in various ways. As discussed earlier, they could be salaried by one particular employer. They could also come in for the day and get paid for that day's worth of work, or they could also access work on a per task basis. For example, like online motorcycle taxi drivers getting orders and getting paid for every order. And I think a notable part of the informal sector, which affects the implications of the responses that we'll discuss later on, is the fact that they are the workers are very heterogeneous. Not everyone who is poor work in the informal sector. and not everyone who works in the informal sector are poor. Although there is in developing countries there is a relationship between the two. Just to set the scene, when the COVID-19 broke out, informal sector in Indonesia is a mix between traditional forms of work and new forms of work. In the recent years, with the help of technology, as well as the penetration of smartphones and internet connection, new ways of working have emerged. This does not only transform old industries, for example, ojeks, motorcycle taxis have existed in Indonesia for many, many years. But it was only recently through the use of a smartphone app such as Gojek that consumers and drivers can be connected seamlessly. But it has also, technology has also created new types of work that didn't exist before. For example, a Kudo agent could facilitate online transactions for customers who do not yet have smartphones and take commissions based on the sales that they generate using this platform. To accommodate these the informal workers, it is also worth noting that in 2015, both agencies for workers' welfare and health have also launched the non-employee scheme, which protects against sickness, death, and as well as old age, which informal workers can pay for independently. However, it's also worth noting that this coverage does not cover the loss of income, which many informal workers are experiencing as a result of the pandemic. As of the COVID-19 outbreak, the informal workers are not yet recognized by the law on manpower. The law on manpower recognizes workers as those who possess formal working relationship with a particular employer. The law, unfortunately, also does not recognize own account workers or self-employed workers. As such, informal workers are unregulated. Their work is unregistered, and they are also unprotected by a dedicated social safety net during this crisis. The next few slides, I'll be talking a bit about the general impact on informal sector workers for across sectors. So for informal workers who continue to work, first they do have a difficulty in accessing markets. Many informal workers, especially in the urban spaces, they work in public space. So I think the image of street vendors come to mind. And with the closure of certain public places, they are unable to access places where they normally would generate their income from. With mobility restrictions, there were also increasing costs related to transport. They have to depend on their own transportation to get to work. At the start of the pandemic outbreak response, there wasn't a movement to provide PPEs for free yet, for example, like masks or other protective equipment. So most of these costs had to be borne by the workers themselves. There was also a drop in demand. I think it's worth noting that informal sector is often an extension of the formal sector. For example, when I was working in Jakarta, I remember sometimes I and my colleagues and other people in the office building would buy food from the street vendors hanging out outside of the office building, and I think that is one way, one way where there is a close relationship between formal sector operations and informal sector operations. There's also stories being shared by transport workers that when schools were closed and children were not going to school, they also lose that bit of income or langganan that they normally have because they used to ferry students to school. There's also a drop in trade and service sectors with, I think, economic difficulties affecting everyone, not just informal sector workers. There is a change in consumption behaviors because of that, and as a result, there's a drop in the demand for their services and products as well. Given that COVID-19 is a health crisis as well, there is understandably a drop in demand for services such as massage or cleaning services. this also affects the income that certain types of informal workers are used to generating. Finally, it is worth noting that the informal sector is a dependent ecosystem within itself. Often the consumer of informal trade and services are the informal workers themselves, and the drop in their income could affect their consumption of other services within the ecosystem. As for informal workers who are not working, we are hearing stories of termination of employment. There are a number of stories of this happening, especially for domestic workers who are being told not to come back to work. Given that they have no formal working arrangements with their employers, there is no obligation for employers to give prior notice nor severance pay. And this is affecting quite a number of workers across sectors. Finally, just before the migration ban was implemented, we did see reports of informal workers who are losing jobs or who are not generating enough income to live in cities, heading back to their hometown. As for shared impact, these are felt by informal workers, sector workers across sectors, and not just self-employed or wage-employed workers. They do face economic vulnerability. A majority of them do face mounting debt. I think we do have a credit culture in Indonesia where things are often bought on credit, not just assets such as automobile products, but also things like smartphones, for example. There are reports that informal workers also face difficulties in paying school fees for their children. They also face food insecurity. There is a quote that goes around whenever we talk about informal sector and the COVID impact on them is that hunger may kill us before coronavirus does. And this ties into the second point, which is that there's often an economic and health trade-off in which there is a trade-off between doing social distancing versus the need to actually go out and work and generate income, because many informal workers do live on a day-to-day basis. Overcrowded living conditions also create a health risk for many of them, especially those who cannot do social distancing and are exposed to unfavorable health risks as a result. Care work, this predominantly affects female informal workers. As schools were closed, students were told to study from home, and this creates a double burden for workers who have to work outside of their homes and to care for the children inside of their homes. There is rising expenses in education. Some schools require the use of smartphones in order for students to study effectively from home. I included a picture here of a phone. This is the only phone that an informal worker has. The only one that the couple has, and I think this also just illustrates the difficulty for these workers not only to sustain themselves economically, but also to meet the rising expenses as a result of the COVID-19 restrictions. For overall urban areas, for example, places like Jakarta, Bandung, Surabaya, we do see similar informal sector jobs, and I'll be talking a bit about how the COVID-19 pandemic and the outbreak response has affected their livelihoods. For street vendors, we are seeing the closure of spaces and activities affecting their income. So less people outside means that they have less consumers. This results in a drop of demand, and which also leads to the loss of income. And it's reported that they were losing income by 70 to 80%. Although the caveat for this is that vendors who sold basic commodities fared better. One point that was raised up by an informal worker I spoke to was that there is a growing number of philanthropy initiatives as well as government initiatives that provide these basic commodities to the underprivileged population, and this actually helps these vendors to fare throughout the pandemic crisis. For online motorcycle taxi drivers, it is reported that they are experiencing a loss of income by 80%. I think one major aspect was the prohibition from transporting people during this pandemic, although consumer behavioral change also contributed to the decreased demand in their services. As mentioned before, this is also a health crisis, and as a result, people do tend to cook at home and avoid just contact with the outside world, and this affects their income significantly. And I was speaking to a few drivers a few days ago, and they were saying that even though the transition is underway, they are still experiencing a drop in demand, and they hypothesize that this could also be because people are changing their behavior in terms of transport. They no longer take an object, but try to walk or take private transport. As for the domestic workers, as mentioned earlier, they can be found mostly in the urban areas, and many of them were dismissed without early notice or severance pay. Worth noting as well is that earlier this month, Go Live, the home services division of the Gojek app, also closed down. So this division constitutes of the massage as well as the home cleaning services. It is unknown how many people are directly affected, but it is a significant proportion of the domestic workers in urban areas. As for other parts of Java and Bali, Chris mentioned earlier, Yogyakarta, one of the major income source is tourism, as well as Bali. So for these parts of the country, they are suffering because tourism is one of the hardest hit sectors, understandably so, due to travel as well as mobility restrictions. It is reported that an estimated of 300,000 informal workers are affected. And we are hearing that they are shifting to alternative income, for example, trade, trying to sell products and services online, or even farming. As for home workers, they are spread across various industries. They are mostly women and largely invisible workforce. They also possess, according to surveys, a lower level of education compared to other informal workers. According to one survey, over 50% of home workers no longer receive any orders due to a drop of demand in the products. Many of these are handicrafts or textiles. Fishermen in places such as Sulawesi or Eastern Indonesian islands, we are hearing reports that prices have fallen by 50 to 75% for seafood products. And I think this is also an example of how informal sector is an extension of the formal sector, as processing businesses slowed down and other countries are on lockdown. Export companies and international trade understandably decline, and this affects how the fishermen was unable to sell their catch, even though their catch remains pretty consistent. We're also seeing hospitality businesses, including those domestic ones. The domestic ones suffer as the demand has dropped, and also they were closed during the past baby period. And also there are disruption in supply chain due to mobility restrictions. Other groups that are affected are farmers in Eastern Indonesian islands. So actually 55% of the workforce in East Nusa Tenggara work in agriculture. It has been overall a pretty bad year for the farmers. Production has fallen due to late inconstant rainfall, but at the same time, demand for their products have also fallen due to mobility restrictions. It was difficult for them to transport these producers to the cities because of the large-scale social restrictions. Market prices have also fallen by 50%. So this affects their earnings as a whole. I won't go too much into detail for the policy responses because I think Titik had explained very comprehensively earlier and very well. I just wanted to note that the government has prepared a range of policy responses, and they have been very helpful for informal workers. However, it is also worth noting that informal workers are often mixed with the other beneficiaries in these programs, and as such, not all informal workers manage to benefit from these policies. According to informal workers, especially my research deals mostly with online transport workers or online motorcycle taxi drivers. They found that the debt restructuring, especially for automotive, was particularly helpful because a lot of them bought their motorcycles on credit and was actually hoping to pay it off as they get income from driving for platforms. Unfortunately, the pandemic creates a difficulty for them to reach that goal. However, the initiative from the government and OJK to restructure the loans was very welcome by these workers. The government also introduced the Cash for Work program, which Titik explained earlier. This has been, I think, very welcome as well for informal workers who had to go back to their hometowns after not being able to earn any income in the urban areas. Civil society and NGO have played a very significant role in providing support for informal workers, both in terms of economic support as well as health support. Here on the right-hand side, I included a screenshot from Kita Bisa, which is a crowdfunding website, kitabisa.com, in which many organizations as well as civil society individuals were crowdfunding to fundraise for informal workers. This example here is an initiative by the Urban Poor Network in Jakarta, in which they fundraised cash assistance for informal workers and the urban poor in their network. Food aid is also provided by civil society and NGO. I think one that stood out for me was an organization called ACT Act, who fundraised to distribute food for informal workers. They also partner with a number of warteg across the different cities to distribute free food for informal workers in those wartegs neighborhoods. There's also groups that help with advocacy for access to government schemes. For example, a coalition that includes Rujak, for example, gathering input from the workers and relaying these concerns to the government. We also see a number of different organizations distributing PPEs as well as sanitizers for free to informal workers, given that they are highly mobile and oftentimes they're at the front line. Private sector also helped with fundraising on donation. Here we see that Tokopedia, OVO, and Grab, they jointly fundraised 2.5 billion rupiah by using their app to encourage app users to donate electronically. We also see the emergence of new businesses, which provides work opportunities for informal workers who are no longer able to generate income from their original source of income. There's also improvements in existing businesses to encourage consumption. For example, in tourism, we're seeing a lot of hotels and hospitality businesses setting up glass partitions, providing PPEs for their workers. And as consumption in these areas increase, it will also trickle down to informal workers who depend on these industries for their livelihood. Online channels, we are also seeing farm and sea to table, just businesses connecting farmers and fishermen to the markets by the use of online platforms. We also see pivoting of production. A lot of the designers and textile producers started producing PPEs, cloth masks, for example, instead of the original like clothes and fashion items that they normally produce. Mutual aid, it's notable that informal workers are also supporting each other. Earlier during the COVID outbreak response, we are seeing a lot of criticisms because it seemed that civil society were supporting mostly ojek drivers because they are very mobile, they are very visible, and it was very encouraging to see even the drivers were sharing, the food aid that they received, for example, to other informal workers around them. Here on the right-hand side is also a hashtag Butuh Driver, which is being used by a number of ojek drivers who are more digital savvy, and were able to support other informal businesses by sort of bypassing the online platforms and selling these and promoting these businesses through their use of the social media. However, implications, as mentioned earlier, not all workers benefited from the policies. Suppose it's worth noting that not all workers are categorized as poor, even though some of them, their income tended to hover above the poverty line before the pandemic, and as such, the loss of income during this time have the potential to make them fall into poverty. I think Prakerja, a comment about that is during this time, most of the trainings were delivered online, and as such, only informal workers who are digital savvy or have access to smartphones are able to benefit from this policy. There's also an issue of the old database of beneficiaries as well as inaccurate information. For example, their ID is not synchronized with their current address. A lot of the informal workers are migrant workers. They don't own a house in Jakarta or other urban areas, and as such, they were experiencing difficulty in receiving the social assistance. There's also an issue of debt restructuring versus debt cancellation. The informal workers that I spoke to express a preference for cancellation, given that they do not know how long this pandemic will last and whether or not they will have the income to actually pay off the debt they've generated prior to the pandemic outbreak, even after the social restrictions have been lifted. There is also an express preference for cash-based support assistance to restart, given that many workers are thinking of alternative sources of income rather than the ones that they are currently doing. So civil society and NGO, it was commented by workers that even though these efforts are very welcome, there's also still uneven distribution. The suggestion here is that it requires a bottom-up approach in which workers can sort of self-declare that they are that they should be eligible for social assistance. For private sector, there is also continued need for assistance and training for low income group. Earlier, we mentioned about the use of online channels that connects farm to table and sea to table, connecting the producers directly with consumers. However, it should also be noted that this significantly is more beneficial for workers who have access to smartphones or are more digital savvy. And I think this has the potential to create further inequality between the digital haves and the digital have-nots. For future direction, there are two recommendations, one for the short term, the other for long term. Given that we don't know how long the pandemic will last and how this will continue to affect the livelihoods of informal workers, the recommendation here is to collect accurate data of informal workers within a region and use the information to design targeted support and redeployment into industries that are actually hiring. I think a big problem with targeted support as well as informal workers being lumped together with other beneficiaries of social assistance is that we don't actually know who these workers are exactly, and as such, we are unable to design a targeted support for them. And I think this is one area that can be improved on. Then one quick way to evaluate is by piloting a database within a region. And finally, for long term, the labor legislation needs to be revised to recognize informal workers and to consider the diversity of the sector, as well as the new forms of work, including platform work. Lastly, also, we need the same labor and social protection standards to be extended to all workers, regardless of employment status. And that's all for me. Thank you so much, and look forward to this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joanna. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Right. Thank you very much. That's the first time I think we've had a comprehensive discussion of informal sector activities in relation to crises. So that's really interesting. I mean, it's a very mixed picture, isn't it? Some people being able to adjust, but many having their incomes reduced, losing their jobs. Health risks are a major problem that you mentioned. Lack of bargaining power, and of course not being covered by the labour legislation. So there's lots of big issues there. Well, can we open this for discussion? And there are a number of ahli in the labour field in the audience. So I'm wondering if I can ask a couple of them to make some comments. Perhaps if we could start with Professor Michelle Ford, who's joined us, and then maybe with Mas Hario, who oftentimes studies labour market issues. Michelle, could we ask you to speak?
Sure, happy to. So I think this is a really important topic, obviously, and I'm working with some colleagues on comparing responses to COVID in a few Southeast Asian countries. And I think one of the things, all I can see is my own face, but anyway, one of the things that is really interesting about this is trying to work out how organised labour movements respond to the changes in the manufacturing sector. There were some very interesting statistics in the first paper about impact on manufacturing, but something that I think is particularly interesting is how international connections of the labour movement have influenced trade union responses to COVID, and then how they've tried to manage the loss of their key strategies for engaging with both employers and governments, which is mass protest. So in terms of the former, just observing through Facebook communities and other forums how quickly some of the trade unions started talking about the dangers of COVID. In fact, well before the government did, urging their members to socially distance, to be careful and so on. And of course, at that stage, there's a big tension between their need to keep their jobs, but also a resentment that other people are being told to work at home, or they're being told they must go to the factory. So that's an interesting tension that I think also shows how the communication from the international labour movement affected that initial response. And then, of course, the second big point of observation in terms of the labour movement's role was negotiations around the omnibus law. And you might remember that there was a big threat by all three confederations to strike, to hold a big demonstration just after social distancing had become a real thing. And in fact, they used that threat very effectively to convince Jokowi to suspend negotiation of that part of the omnibus law for further consultation. I found that particularly interesting because by using the threat of protest rather than actual protest, it was really moving out of its comfort zone, but I thought in a very strategic way. I think in the longer term, though, it will be interesting to see what the impact on manufacturing and on global production networks has on organised labour, but also on formal work more generally.
Mas Hario, could you follow up with a question? Thanks very much, Michelle.
Okay. My question directed to all first, and the second is for Titi. First, all strategies to prevent COVID and an economy are based on the assumption that coronavirus do not spread airborne. With new information that coronavirus spreads through airborne and increased workplace clusters, is a new strategy needed. Maybe first, more stringent protocol and ensure compliance, which is very, very difficult. Because, for example, companies tend to hide COVID cases because of reputation and others. Yeah. Should we have more testing, tracing, and isolation? And the second is maybe because of this phenomenon, counterintuitively, we should focus on high value-added sectors, less labor-intensive sectors. Also focus on agriculture, because agriculture is open space, not crowded, but also include the supply chains of agriculture. And maybe we should also rethink about higher social assistance. Maybe the proposal of Pak Khatib Basri, universal basic income, 1 million per person, maybe is now become needed. Yeah. My second question is for Titi. We always hear the bottlenecking. Sorry?
That's the third question. Go on.
Oh, yeah. It's about the bottlenecking. What is the details and updates for that? Because we always hear the bottlenecking, but we never hear about the details and updates of that. Thank you.
Okay, so I think Michelle's question is probably more directed towards Joanna than to Titik, but maybe Titik has some response as well. So over to you, Joanna.
Sorry, was the question about how trade?
The first question was to do with international connections and the role of international trade unions and how they respond to this very different set of political circumstances. And the second one was the about the omnibus strike threat. I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I think in my research, I focus mostly on online motorcycle taxi drivers. There is an indication that they have started to connect with international unions or overseas, and as well as the overseas unions reaching out to them. But I think it's important to note as well that these unions are app-based unions, so they are not the traditional labor unions that mostly the traditional labor unions. But I think international network is very important because it could give them lessons from what has been done overseas, and also to sort of uniformize the responses to the government, and to also push for collective representation of informal sector workers.
And do you have any response on where we are at now with Labour's position in regard to the omnibus law, which they opposed very strongly initially?
Yes, so I've spoken to a few informal workers, especially online transport workers. I think there's various studies that not only in Indonesia but also overseas that argues that many of these online or platform workers do not see themselves as workers in the traditional sense. There is a strong narrative that they are own account workers or they are entrepreneurs. Some of the figures in the industry, the online transport industry that I've spoken to, actually are sort of on the fence about the omnibus law. They are not joining the traditional unions in protesting against it because they want to wait and see what's in it for them. They are under the impression that most of the regulations affect mostly formal sector jobs, and for them that is not really relevant to the conditions that they're in.
Titik, do you have a response to that, particularly on the omnibus law and Labour labour conditions, labour and the labour movement?
I think the labor union has the rights to comment or to protest on the omnibus law, Pak. It's just that we need to come into some kind of balance between the overall objective of the omnibus law. I think the discussion is still under is going. I mean, the discussion is still going at the parliament, discussing the omnibus law, Pak.
Okay. Terima kasih, Bu. Yeah. Okay. Then Mas Haryo's questions on the airborne spread of that we need a new strategy.
Yeah. I think I agree with Mas Haryo that a stringent protocol need to be imposed. At least Jakarta and West Java impose fine to those who don't wear mask. So the issue is probably how discipline the government to monitor and implement this fine. And also, I think a part of the fine is the socialization. So I mean, the relevant institutions or stakeholders need to be actively participate in this effort, including the unions, I guess, as Michelle already mentioned, because the workers is the workers that spreading. I mean, who works that spread the virus anyway. So if we don't observe the protocol, we impose a risk to others and to ourselves. And on the second point of Mas Haryo's comment is, I think naturally we are going to move to higher value added and less labor intensive sectors given the situation. Because anyway, if you see in the data that the human capital intensive sectors are the one that is growing, while the more unskilled labor intensive is negatively affected. So, but then we need to provide some cushion to those negatively affected by the COVID-19, while facilitating the sectors that can accelerate during this time, so that we can have a new engine of growth or something like that. And on the bottlenecking, Mas Haryo, we rarely discuss this publicly, but of course, first we have to find whether there is a bottleneck, and then we map where the bottleneck is, and then of course, if it is in particular institution, we talk with the particular institutions on how to solve the problem. Even sometimes we have to amend the decree, the regulation to get the things moving. So so that's basically the bottlenecking, Mas Haryo. Thank you very much for the question.
Terima kasih, Mbak. Joanna, do you have any quick response on any of those questions?
Yeah, perhaps I could maybe add a comment on the suggestion to shift to value-added roles. I think with the Kartu Prakerja, there's Ibu Titi mentioned earlier that most of the workers choose to do courses on sales and marketing, which is very tied to entrepreneurship. I think from the workers that I've spoken to, at least the younger generation and the ones who are digital savvy and are good with smartphones, there is a move towards entrepreneurship because orders through the motorcycle taxi platforms is very low at the moment. They are using this time to explore entrepreneurship opportunities. And I think perhaps this is a trend going forward that we can see informal workers move towards.
Okay, well, thank you very much. We're fast running out of time. there are a number, we still have a number of people who've raised their hands. One of them is Arjen and another is Peter Macaulay. I wonder if you could put your questions, would you like to put your questions directly? And if you could make them brief. Arjen, are you still there?
I am. Sorry, I was unmuting myself. This is Arndt from the Health Policy Plus project. My question is on the informal sector voluntary segment that pays into the National Health Insurance Scheme. Anecdotally, we're hearing that there are a lot of problems with these workers paying into their scheme in terms of membership premiums, and hence they're losing their benefits at a time when healthcare coverage would be quite important. Could any of the speakers, maybe Octavia, could comment on this and what kind of statistics are available and what would be the best response? Thank you.
Sure. Thank you so much for the question, Arjen. Perhaps for statistics, maybe I could get back to you separately after the presentation because I don't have it off the top of my head. But perhaps one thing that I could comment on the voluntary contribution is that because the informal workers do register and they pay voluntarily, in times of crisis, I think it is bound that this might not be a priority for them, given that they have to contribute to other things. Whereas for formal sector workers, they have the employer contribution for it. So I think the question is that this raises is the structure of the scheme and who should be contributing to these schemes for informal workers, especially.
Yeah, thanks very much, Joanna. Peter Macaulay, could we have your question?
Yeah, thank you very much. One question to Bu Titik and one question to Bu Joanna. To Bu Titik, this is about the credit programs. There are many countries that have credit programs, and the credit programs are often not all that so easy. My questions to you are first, how does it work in Indonesia? Which banks will provide the credit? Is it the Bank Rakyat Indonesia, BNI, Mandiri, others? I mean, is it a number of them? Is it 10 or 20 or a lot of them? And second, one of the problems that we run into then is if firms can borrow, but then they have credit risk and they might find they cannot repay. So who bears the credit risk? Do the banks have to bear the credit risk? And if that's so, then the banks may not be happy with that. That's question one. Question two is to Bu Joanna.
Please keep it brief, Pat.
Yeah, you mentioned the importance of a database for informal workers. My question is, what do the workers themselves feel about a database? Sometimes informal workers like to remain hidden. Sometimes they don't want pejabat and the pemerintah to know what they are doing. So that's my second question. Terima kasih, yeah.
Yeah, terima kasih. Perhaps Bu Titik first and then Joanna.
Thank you, Pak Peter. Credit will be channeled through the banking sectors, Pak. So the banks will provide the credits. The government started with the state-owned enterprise banks, the BRI, BNI, Mandiri, and so on, and then continue to the private sectors. So the thing is like this: the government put the money, put the funds into the banks, and the bank channel it to the MSMEs. And the government also provide the credit guarantee, and this funding is actually low cost, Pak, because it is use the funds from the bonds bought by the central bank, and the risk who bore the risk, there is a what we call it a credit guarantee scheme. So the credit will be guaranteed by Askrindo Jamkrindo, the insurance company. The government share the risk with the banking sectors. I think hope that answer your question, Pak Peter.
Joanna, do you have anything to add? Please keep it very brief. We're almost out of time.
Sure. So yes, I think that's correct, Pak Peter, that informal workers do tend not to want to be registered for various reasons, including taxation. But I think in times of crisis, they are sort of changing their view on this. Most of the ones that I've spoken to actually prefer having a database so that distribution for assistance is even and they get assistance as well from the government. So yeah, I think their preferences change with changing situation.
Acho, can we go a few minutes over? We still have a number of questions.
Sure, sure.
We can. Okay, great. Well, could I invite Pak Hal Hill and Pak Budi Reso Sedamang? Both of them have put their hands up. And a third question from Krishna Gupta. So could you all keep them all very short, if you please? Go ahead, Hal Hill.
Okay, terima kasih. Hi, everybody, and thanks for two excellent presentations. I enjoyed them both. Titik, a question to you. Hi, selamat pagi, and hope you're well. Titik, the question, I guess, is for a crisis like this, of such severity and hitting so suddenly, question is, for social assistance, there's a sort of trade-off, isn't there? On the one hand, you want to get the money out really quickly because the crisis is so severe and so quick. On the other hand, you want to target as much as you can to the people who really need it. It just, thinking about your excellent presentation, it occurred to me, I think you mentioned 7 programs of social assistance. Question in my mind is that actually in some ways too much? That is, you've just got to get the money out quickly, and even though you might want to fine tune and target, it's just not practical in the very short run. And so you're going to make mistakes, you know, type 1 error, people who don't need it get it, and type 2, people who need it don't get it. Just wondering what the trade-off is and whether the government's going to fine tune as the COVID continues beyond the first 3 or 4 months. And that might get the disbursement rate up a bit more quickly. Terima kasih.
Terima kasih, Pak Budi.
Thank you very much. A good presentation. So my question is similar to Hal. Given that Indonesian resources is limited, we know that to fund our deficit right now, we are struggling. And also that the period of the COVID is uncertain. I just wonder whether the strategy in yes, the stimulus program are comprehensive, but the strategy, whether it is appropriate. So a bit different than how I thought that among those programs that has been relatively smooth are the social assistance. So just focus on the social assistance, hold the micro and small enterprise incentive until it is certain whether or not the disbursement can be effective, and also that the impact will be effective, because the micro and small enterprise has 2 jobs that they have to do. One is that, yes, they're providing a social assistance to increase the resilience of micro and small enterprise, but second is that this incentive is supposed to be giving them a foundation to jumpstart the economy when the pandemic has been controlled. But the problem is that we are not certain how long the pandemic is ongoing. So if you disburse the money to the micro and small enterprise, they're not being able to create a foundation for as a jumpstart for the economy. So what do you think that it is?
Yeah.
Okay, Pak.
Terima kasih. Yeah, I know. And finally, with Krishna. Are you there?
I think I will just read Krishna's question because he's not available to ask question. Okay. Seems intriguing that since the government assistance program seems to target mostly formal, for example, tax cuts, while COVID hurt services and manufacturing more, beneficiaries are mostly farmers. Bottom-up targeting would need central government to trust local government while also provide them with cash. His question to Bu Titik, are there ways for local governments to get their own funding without relying on central governments? Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. All those questions are around issues of targeting. and what is the most effective form of social assistance. And I think earlier there was some discussion of universal income or universal subsidy. So can I hand it over to the two speakers? To Joanna, would you like to go first, and then Titik round it off?
Yeah, for informal sector workers, because they are heterogeneous and their situations are not uniform across the board, there is an express preference for social assistance in the form of cash rather than subsidies in other forms. And also, I think a majority of them that I've spoken to do prefer some sort of social assistance as capital in the form of cash for restarting, because many of them, for example, online motorcycle taxi drivers are beginning to realize that they cannot depend on orders from the apps because the demand is declining.
Okay. Titik?
Hello, yeah, thank you, Pak Chris. Hello, Hal. Very nice to meet you. I'm a proud student of Hal, by the way. Thank you for the questions. I think for the longer term, okay, short and medium term is TNP2K is evaluating all the assistance, and in the longer term, the database that we are using to as a basis for our social assistance is also going to be updated comprehensively. That's Vice President's instruction, because as you know, our data is kind of outdated and patchy, updated. I mean, some region updated the data, but some others are not. And also, I think related to Pak Budi's point is that we should, and Krishna's point, that we should engage, or I mean, the central government in coordination, in collaboration with the local government, is disbursing this social assistance to reach a better targeting. I think this has been done. I mean, of course, in the early period of the implementation of social assistance, we have a hiccup. But ever since the evolution, the management of the data, between the central government and local government improve. I think the targeting is better than April or May, for example. And Mas Budi's point, I think I agree with you. I think we have to have our social assistance in place, well covered, the vulnerable one, and the private sectors, including the micro and small and medium enterprises, are jumpstart when we are sure about the COVID-19 is safe enough for us to open the economy. However, as I think Joanna mentioned, that these micro, for example, and small firms are also need to survive. I mean, the social assistance is a basic income, right? And with the limited opening up of the economy, they can work as well, yeah. So they have better income and so on. So I think the government is focusing on the micro and small, so that they can restart the business with the new COVID protocols. I hope I answer your questions, Hal and Pak Budi. Thank you. And also, once again, on Krishna's point, because the local government has been reallocating their budget to address COVID-19 and the economy, the central government provide loans, zero-cost loans, to local governments. It started with the DKI, Jakarta, and West Java, where the loans is from the bonds issued and bought by issued by the government, bought by central bank. So it's zero cost basically, to allow the local governments to have more rooms and funds to manage the COVID-19 and the economy. Thank you, Pak.
Thank you very much, Titik. That's a very, very comprehensive answer. And I'm sure you can talk with your former supervisor at great length on these issues. But Ato, how's our time? We're about 10 minutes over already now, I think.
That's right, Pak.
There's a couple of more questions. Can I?
Oh, I think our time is up. So,
Right.
but we already copy all the written questions, and we can share later with the speakers.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, on behalf of everyone, can I thank the two speakers for a very stimulating discussion. It's a huge topic, and I think we've covered it pretty well. And there are many questions still outstanding and many answers outstanding, but at least we've covered a number of the important ones today. So thank you very much, Joanna. Thank you very much, Mbak Titik.
Thank you, Pak Chris. Thank you for chairing the session, and also thanks Titi, Joanna, and all the participants. Before I hand it over back to Nuke, let me read the program. So we don't have one scheduled for next week, but the week after that, which is 12th of August, we have a special webinar with our colleagues from Prospera. So that would be on gender matters in Indonesia's COVID-19 policy response. And the speakers are Melissa Wells and Bimbi Kabasnet from Prospera. And the discussants are Wita Krisanti from Investing in Women and Ariana Utomo from the University of Melbourne. So back to you, Nuke.
Okay, thank you, Acho. I will not close the webinar yet. So if Pak Hal and Titi and Doni, and I see a lot of HAL students here, and then Mbak Uti and everyone, and Puspa, if you would like to continue the discussion, please feel free to do so. I will leave this open, but for everyone else who would like to join in, please stay, or otherwise, please feel free to leave. Thank you.